Sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't strangers in the dark. They're the people we know, the ones who smile politely in public, wave at the neighbors, and pretend to have it all together. Behind closed doors, though, the truth can be far more chilling. This is the story of Tara Lambert, a woman whose outward appearance of beauty, charm, and suburban normalcy masked a darkness so cold and calculating it would shock even the most seasoned investigators. She wasn't just unhappy in her marriage. She wasn't just bitter or resentful. Tara wanted something more permanent, something final. She wanted someone gone, and she wasn't planning on getting her own hands dirty. From the outside, Tara's life looked enviable. She had a home, a family, and a husband. She played the part of the all-American wife, presenting herself as friendly, approachable, even glamorous at times. People who met her casually would never have guessed what she was capable of. But beneath the surface, resentment had been building. Resentment that would soon curdle into a plot so twisted it sounded more like fiction than reality. At the center of her rage was her husband's ex. To Tara, this woman wasn't just part of the past. She was an obstacle, a thorn in her side, a reminder that Tara would never fully control the narrative of her marriage. In Tara's mind, there was only one solution. So, in 2016, she began quietly searching for a way out. Not out of her marriage, but out of the problem she believed stood in her way. That's when she reached out to a man she thought could make her troubles disappear. A man she believed was a hired gun, willing to kill if the price was right. She had no idea he wasn't a hitman at all. The man Tara contacted was actually working with law enforcement. He was part of a sting operation, set up after whispers of her intentions reached the wrong ears. The moment Tara started talking, investigators were listening, and what they heard would leave them stunned. The meetings were arranged in secret, often in parking lots or public spaces where Tara felt safe enough to let her guard down. What she didn't know was that every word, every nervous laugh, every instruction she gave was being captured on hidden cameras. The footage showed a woman who wasn't panicked or coerced. She wasn't acting in desperation. Tara was calm, matter-of-fact, even playful at times as she discussed the logistics of murder. She leaned into the window of the man's car, her voice low but steady, and described exactly what she wanted. Not just vague wishes or idle threats, detailed instructions. She named her target. She explained when her husband's ex would be home. She even offered payment up front to ensure the job would be done. The casualness of it all was what struck investigators most. Tara spoke about killing another woman the way someone else might talk about running errands. To her, this wasn't a crime of passion. It was a transaction. When the man pressed her, asked if she was sure, asked if she really wanted to go through with it, she didn't hesitate. She nodded. She smiled. She was sure. And then came the moment that sealed her fate. Tara reached into her purse, pulled out a stack of cash, and handed it over. Thousands of dollars. Payment for murder. What she didn't realize was that the hidden cameras had captured every second. The exchange. The words. The intent. It was undeniable. The very next day, police arrived at Tara's home. She was arrested on the spot, still reeling from the shock of her plan collapsing around her. To neighbors watching from their porches, it must have seemed surreal. The friendly woman next door led away in handcuffs for hiring a hitman. But to investigators, it was the final step in a case they had been quietly building for weeks. When the story hit the news, people were stunned. The footage of Tara leaning casually into that car window, describing how she wanted another woman killed, spread quickly. Viewers were horrified not just by the crime itself, but by how ordinary she looked while plotting something so extraordinary. This wasn't a hardened criminal. This wasn't a shadowy underworld figure. This was a suburban wife and mother, standing in a parking lot, planning murder like it was just another item on her to-do list. And as the trial approached, prosecutors prepared to show the jury exactly who Tara Lambert really was. Because behind the soft smile and the pleasant demeanor was a woman willing to destroy a life just to clear the path for her own. Before we go deeper, if stories like this grip you the way they grip me, hit that subscribe button now. We expose the darkest truths, and together, we make sure they're never forgotten. The courtroom was packed when Tara's trial began. Reporters filled the benches, eager to cover the suburban wife turned would-be killer. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. They played the recordings. They showed the footage. Jurors watched as Tara leaned into the car window, her voice steady, her words unmistakable. They heard her confirm the target. They watched her hand over the cash. And when the undercover officer took the stand, he described her demeanor in detail, Calm, confident, no hesitation. The defense tried to argue otherwise. They painted Tara as vulnerable, manipulated, even pressured into a situation she didn't fully understand. They claimed she was trapped by her own naivete, that she hadn't truly grasped the seriousness of what she was doing. But the evidence was unshakable. This wasn't a woman who stumbled into a misunderstanding. This was a woman who made choice after choice to meet, to plan, to pay. The jury saw through the defense. They returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the quiet community Tara once called home. Guilty. The suburban wife who thought she could orchestrate the perfect crime without lifting a finger had been caught in her own web of deceit. And her story didn't end there. Because, as sentencing loomed, more secrets about Tara's past and her relationships began to surface. Secrets that painted an even darker picture of the woman behind the smile. The guilty verdict landed like a hammer. For the jurors, there was no question. For the prosecution, there was relief. For the community, there was disbelief that the friendly, well-dressed woman they had once waved to in grocery store aisles was now a convicted felon, branded forever as someone who had tried to pay for another woman's death. But inside Tara's world, the walls were closing in. She sat in the courtroom, her posture stiff, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. In the days leading up to sentencing, she maintained the same rehearsed expression, a mix of indignation and fragility, as though she were the victim of a cruel misunderstanding. To her, the narrative had always been simple. She was innocent, she had been manipulated, she hadn't really meant it. But the recordings told another story, and no amount of spin could erase what the jury had seen and heard. The day of sentencing drew crowds again. Reporters lined the steps outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, microphones angled in anticipation. Tara walked in flanked by her defense team, her hair neatly styled, her outfit carefully chosen, the image of composure. But no amount of polish could change what she was about to face. Inside, the victim at the center of Tara's plot sat surrounded by loved ones. She had lived for months under the shadow of knowing someone wanted her gone. Every creak in her home, every car passing on her street, every moment alone carried a weight most of us will never understand. To her, Tara wasn't just a neighbor or an acquaintance. Tara was a threat to her very existence. When the judge spoke, his words were measured but firm. He acknowledged Tara's lack of a prior record, her standing in the community, the arguments her lawyers made about her mental health. But none of it could outweigh the seriousness of her crime. Hiring someone to kill, even if the hitman was an undercover officer, was one of the gravest acts imaginable. The sentence was handed down. 7 years in prison. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Some thought it was too lenient, that a woman who plotted another's death should face decades, not years. Others argued it was harsh for a woman with no history of violence. But for the victim, for her family, it wasn't about numbers. It was about safety, knowing that for at least the next several years, Tara wouldn't be free to try again. Prison stripped away the facade Tara had clung to for so long. The polished image, the suburban housewife routine, the controlled smile, all of it faded under the fluorescent glare of incarceration. Inside those walls, she was no longer the woman who could charm neighbors or manipulate friends. She was just another inmate, another number in the system. But Tara wasn't done fighting. From her cell, she began working with her attorneys to appeal the conviction. She argued that her statements had been misunderstood, that she hadn't truly intended for anyone to be harmed, that the sting operation had entrapped her. Her defense team filed motion after motion, hoping to chip away at the foundation of the case. Meanwhile, the victim lived in a state of limbo. She tried to rebuild her life, to move forward, but the shadow of what could have been never fully disappeared. Knowing that Tara had once plotted her death made trust difficult, made peace elusive. She had to live with the knowledge that the danger she faced wasn't random. It wasn't the work of a stranger. It was a deliberate choice by someone she knew. The appeals stretched on, each hearing reopening wounds for the families involved. Each time Tara's name appeared in the news, it was another reminder of the betrayal, the fear, the manipulation. And then, in 2019, after serving only part of her sentence, Tara's conviction was overturned on appeal, a procedural issue, a technicality that didn't erase what she had done but gave her another chance to fight in court. The announcement sent shockwaves once again. Reporters filled headlines with her name. The community braced for another trial, and the victim, now years into trying to heal, had to face the nightmare all over again. Prosecutors moved quickly. They weren't about to let Tara walk free without accountability. They prepared their case for retrial, determined to show once again that her intentions had been clear, her actions undeniable. And in the second trial, the same evidence returned to the forefront. The recordings, the footage, the cash exchanged. Jurors once again saw a woman who wasn't confused, who wasn't pressured, but who had calmly, deliberately tried to pay for murder. This time, the sentence was even harsher. She was convicted again and given 7 years in prison. To Tara, it was another crushing blow. To the victim, it was both relief and exhaustion. Relief that justice had once again been delivered. Exhaustion from the endless cycle of courtrooms, headlines, and the constant reopening of scars that had barely begun to heal. Tara's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil doesn't always look like the villains we see in movies. Sometimes it looks like the woman next door, the one who waves politely as you walk your dog, the one who seems perfectly normal until the mask slips. And as Tara sat behind bars once more, the community that had once whispered about her scandal now spoke about her as a warning. Because her story wasn't just about a failed murder-for-hire plot. It was about manipulation, control, and the terrifying reality that sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones we should fear most. Before we continue, if you're still here with me, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Stories like this matter because they remind us to look closer, to listen harder, and to never ignore the warning signs. But Tara's case didn't just fade quietly into the prison system. Even from behind bars, she continued to draw attention. From journalists, from true crime enthusiasts, from anyone fascinated by how an ordinary wife could spiral into such extraordinary darkness. And with each interview, each appeal, each whispered rumor from inside the prison walls, the picture of Tara grew clearer and darker. Prison life has a way of stripping people down to their rawest form. No makeup, no stylish outfits, no carefully rehearsed smile to charm the neighbors. Just 4 walls, a jumpsuit, and the reality of what you've done. For Tara Lambert, that reality was heavy, but it never seemed to fully break her. Behind bars, she developed a reputation. Other inmates described her as someone who kept to herself, but always carried an air of superiority, as if she believed she didn't belong there. She wasn't like the rest of them, she insisted. She wasn't a criminal. She was misunderstood, manipulated, a victim of circumstances. But the guards, the investigators, the prosecutors, they knew better. They had watched the footage, listened to her words. They had seen the smirk on her face as she leaned into the window of that undercover officer's car, talking about another woman's death like it was a business deal. Still, Tara tried to spin her story. When journalists reached out, when producers came knocking for documentaries, she positioned herself as someone wronged by the system. She claimed she was naive, that she hadn't really wanted anyone to die, that she had been set up. And in a strange way, some people believed her. There are always those who want to see the best in a smiling face, who believe the pretty suburban wife couldn't possibly be capable of such darkness. But those who knew the evidence, those who had lived through the trial, weren't fooled. They knew exactly who Tara was. The woman she had targeted never forgot either. Imagine living with that weight, knowing your life had been placed on a scale and someone decided to pay cash to have you erased. For her, every creak in her home, every car passing on her street, every moment alone carried a weight most of us will never understand. That kind of fear burrows deep into a person's soul. It lingers in ways the rest of us may never fully understand. The appeals stretched on, each hearing reopening wounds for the families involved. Each time Tara's name appeared in the news, it was another reminder of the betrayal, the fear, the manipulation. And then came the interviews. Tara gave statements from prison, claiming she had only been venting, that she had never truly intended for anyone to be harmed. She spoke about her troubled childhood, about struggles with mental health, about insecurities that spiraled out of control. She painted herself as broken, fragile, misunderstood. But the recordings told a different story. Because no matter how softly she spoke in interviews, no matter how carefully she framed her words, the camera from that day in the parking lot showed the truth. Tara leaning into a stranger's car, nodding calmly, handing over cash. That image was burned into the public's mind. And the more she tried to rewrite her story, the more the evidence pushed back. Public fascination with her case grew. Documentaries, podcasts, news specials. Everyone wanted to understand how a suburban wife could slide so easily into the role of a would-be murderer. Was it desperation? Was it jealousy? Was it a hidden darkness that had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to emerge? Theories swirled, but one fact was undeniable. Tara had crossed a line most people never even approach. She hadn't just fantasized about hurting someone. She had taken deliberate steps, planned meetings, exchanged money, confirmed details, and even if she never got what she paid for, the intent was clear. For the victim, the nightmare became part of her identity. She was no longer just a woman living her life. She was the target. Her name appeared in headlines alongside Tara's, her privacy shattered by a crime she never asked to be part of. She hadn't chosen this role, but it had been forced upon her by someone else's obsession. Years passed, but the weight of Tara's choices lingered. Every time her name came up in court filings or news reports, the old wounds reopened. And for the community, the case became a permanent stain, a reminder that evil can lurk even in the most ordinary places. Still, the fascination remained. People asked the same questions over and over. What drove her to it? Did she really believe she could get away with it? And perhaps the darkest question of all, if the undercover officer had been a real hitman, would Tara have smiled the same way when she heard the job was done? Those who watched her closely believed the answer was yes, because Tara never showed remorse. Not truly. Not in the recordings, not in the courtroom, not even in prison interviews. Her apologies, when they came, were hollow, framed as misunderstandings, misinterpretations, mistakes, never as ownership of her own choices. And that is what made her so chilling. This wasn't a story about a moment of rage or a heated argument gone wrong. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was cold, calculated, deliberate. A woman sat down, thought about the obstacles in her life, and decided the solution was murder. Before I go further, if you're still with me, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories matter, not just because they shock us, but because they remind us to stay vigilant, to recognize the signs, and to never underestimate the darkness that can hide behind a smile. Tara Lambert's story didn't just end with her conviction. It lingered. It echoed. It reminded everyone who heard it that appearances can deceive, that charm can hide malice, and that sometimes the person waving from across the street has already decided who should live and who should die. Time passes, but some scars never heal. For Tara Lambert, years in prison have come and gone. For the victim she once targeted, those same years have been heavy with the weight of what might have been. Because when someone places a price on your life, you never really feel safe again. Even as Tara served her sentence, her shadow remained in the lives of those she had tried to erase. The victim lived with the memory of sitting in a courtroom, hearing her name spoken aloud as a target, knowing that, if not for an undercover sting, her children could have grown up without a mother. That kind of fear burrows deep into a person's soul. It lingers in ways the rest of us may never fully understand. For the community, the fascination with Tara's case never completely faded. Each time her name resurfaced in appeals, news outlets, or prison reports, the whispers began again. That's the woman who tried to hire a hitman. Neighbors who once saw her as just another suburban wife couldn't erase the image of her handing over cash for murder. And for true crime followers, Tara's story became a chilling example of how far jealousy and control can drive a person. She wasn't someone forced into crime by desperation. She wasn't under threat. She wasn't starving. She wasn't cornered. She was comfortable, living in a quiet neighborhood, raising a family. And yet she decided someone else's death was the solution to her problems. Inside prison, Tara continued to insist she had been misunderstood. She sat for interviews, presented herself as fragile, insisted she had been entrapped. She spoke about stress, mental health, and manipulation, but rarely about responsibility. The word sorry never seemed to come with any true weight. Meanwhile, the victim tried to move forward. She found ways to rebuild her life, surrounding herself with support, holding on tightly to her loved ones. But the trauma didn't disappear. Each birthday, each milestone, each ordinary day was a reminder that she was still here, but she might not have been. That the simple act of living had once been threatened by the envy of another woman. The case left lasting questions. How many others are out there like Tara? People who smile at neighbors, post cheerful family photos online, and secretly plot in the shadows? How do we protect ourselves from dangers we cannot see? For law enforcement, Tara's case became a testament to the importance of undercover work. Without that sting operation, without the hidden cameras and the recorded conversations, Tara's intentions might never have been uncovered until it was too late. Her calm, confident tone during those meetings proved beyond doubt that she knew exactly what she was doing. And that's what continues to unsettle people to this day. Tara didn't look like a killer. She didn't act like the kind of person most of us imagine when we think of crime. She blended in, smiled in photos, waved at neighbors. She was ordinary, and that ordinariness is what made her so terrifying. Because evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears makeup, sometimes it carries a purse, sometimes it smiles politely, while quietly planning who should disappear. The years rolled on, and Tara's name slowly faded from headlines. But as her release date drew nearer, anxiety rippled through the people whose lives she had already devastated. The victim wondered if she would ever feel safe again. Would Tara try to reach out? Would she harbor the same resentments? Would freedom reignite the same dangerous desires? For some, the thought of her walking free was unbearable. For others, it was proof that even the darkest stories eventually find an ending. But for those closest to the case, it was a reminder that time served doesn't erase intent, that a prison sentence doesn't erase the choices she made. And so, the story of Tara Lambert lingers. It lingers in the court transcripts, in the footage of that fateful parking lot meeting, in the memories of a victim who will never forget the day her life was priced at a few $1,000s. It lingers in the community that once believed it could never happen here. And it lingers in the chilling reality that the smiling faces we trust most can sometimes hide the darkest secrets of all. Before we close, take a second to subscribe. These stories matter because they remind us that vigilance isn't paranoia, it's survival. And by keeping these stories alive, we give a voice to those who nearly had theirs stolen. Tara Lambert's name may fade with time, but the lesson of her story never should. Evil doesn't always come kicking down the door. Sometimes it knocks politely and smiles as it asks to come inside.